Where are you from?
This lock of hair has rewritten the history of human migration. It was taken from a young Aboriginal man near Kalgoorlie in the 1920s, and scientists have used the DNA to map the origins of the first Australians.
We find, in fact, evidence that Aboriginal Australians diversified from other populations much earlier than what people previously thought, about 70,000 years.
Descendants of Aboriginal Australians left first, followed by a second group of humans who would eventually settle in Europe and Asia.
Aboriginal Australians are descending from the first human explorers. I mean, these are the guys that went into unknown land while my ancestors and Asian ancestors were hanging around somewhere in Africa or in the Middle East.
The research shows Indigenous Australians were not only the first humans to settle here, but they're also one of the oldest continuous cultures outside of Africa. For Aboriginal elder Ivan Forrest, it's a profound discovery.
This proves, and it proves to the rest of the world, that we were the first people here. We've been here for a long time, and we're not going away.
You might wonder why he said that. He didn't seem very happy. Why did he say, and we're not going away? What did he mean?
Can you tell us what's Link Up all about?
Link Up at Queensland Aboriginal Corporation is... Wait. Speak into that or... Okay, all right. We exist to assist Aboriginal at the age of 18 who've been removed, forcibly removed by the government. Taken away. They were taken away from their families.
Taken away?
Yes, that's right. That's removed, right. As in physically.
She was, I was.
Yes. Mm.
Yeah.
And we're talking about from the understanding of past government policies in Australia.
The government and the churches.
Not in Australia, I don't.
Okay. Well, taken away, you know, if you take something and take it away and put it somewhere else, well, that's how we were taken from where we come from and put somewhere else that we don't belong to. Do you understand?
Another country.
Taken from their parents.
What for?
That's what the government did.
Because it was
the
a
past
government
policies at the time, the legislation of Australia at the time.
If you're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, you were deemed the responsibility of the Aboriginal.
And you came under the Act.
The government, and they
Act.
placed these policies in place where they took people away. And
What did they do? What did they do with you?
Put them in homes and dormitories and...
Put us on missions that we don't belong to.
all of Australia.
Your parents?
My whole family was taken and put on a mission.
So the policy was, and when we're talking about the policy, we're talking about the government legislation at the time. So yes, I do know why. If you put into the context of the White Australia policy and a policy of that Aboriginal peoples, not only in Australia but globally, are better off in a dominant culture. So it was going back to the Charles Darwin theory of evolution. So we go back that far. So here in Australia, in every state in Australia, there was different legislation. Here in Queensland, where we are now, the legislation stated that children, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children under 18 years of age, the government was their guardian. So basically parents never had a right. So that's the context of it.
There's also
and up to 1972.
How do you feel about it?
Well, it's unfair, of course.
It hurts.
Very
really hurts.
We've all been traumatised, and Link Up was set up to assist those people who were forcibly removed, adopted, fostered, removed or put into dormitories like Palm Island. And those generations have now come back to us saying we don't know who we are because they've no sense of place or where they belong. And they come back to Link Up. We have Link Ups throughout Australia. They come to us and they say, can you help us? We think we're Aboriginal. We think we're Torres Strait Islander, we don't know, because the government was their guardian. They had the responsibility of all the information, and it's only in the last 20 years that we've been able to access our own personal information. So that's what Link Up does. We act as a mediator, and we actually research on their behalf as well with regards to finding information and also families of people who've been taken away. So, yeah.
Do you feel angry about this?
We're very traumatised, Rose. It's affected after 4 or 5 generations. Oh, you might. No. Pruned a few trees earlier. It's traumatised people by being removed because Artie was saying Artie's older than us, and you still have those feelings of hurt and, you know, of something that happened to you that we had no control of.
No. You don't forgive.
Well, it's hard. It's an individual thing.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
You don't forgive.
Some were so traumatised that, you know, forgiven just not a word.
It's not a word in my...
But,
I don't think about that.
And people have said to us, well, forget it and move on, but we can't because that's our history. And we've lost our grannies, our mothers, our grandparents, our grandfathers along the way. Who that was taken away.
Good morning.
You know, that...
See, I lost my father through all this. They can't give me back my father.
That's right. And the choice was taken away from our mob, where they could make... Whereas now, if someone said to me, because I've got 4 children and 6 grandchildren, someone came to me and said, I'm going to take your family away, there'd be all hell to pay. But our family had no choice because that was taken away from them.
This is unbelievable. Appalling. Shocking. Who could have done this? Who could have done this to these people? And why? For 100 years, from 1869 onwards, colonial and Commonwealth state governments of Australia, operating under a crazed ideology of culture and religion, kidnapped Aboriginal children and forced them to live under Christian surveillance.
Taken away. They were taken away from their families.
Taken away.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
As in physically.
She was. I was.
Yes.
The kidnapped children became known as the Stolen Generations. This war crime continued until 1972, 5 years after a national referendum demanded the practice be stopped. But it took another 36 years before an Australian Prime Minister was willing to publicly apologise for this continued atrocity. Finally, one did, this year, 2008.
A painful chapter in Australia's story.
As Prime Minister of Australia, I am sorry.
We were the first people here. We've been here for a long time and we're not going away.
His words are even more poignant when you realise that I was wrong to say that the practice continued until 1972, because it's still going on. Listen carefully to what she says.
Only the people over the age of 18 who've been removed, forcibly removed by the government.
Link Up has only been given access to information about people who are already over the age of 18. They're still taking the children under all sorts of pretenses.
But the wrongs did continue. Within a year of Rudd's apology, 37 Aboriginal children were taken from their families allegedly for neglect, in the town of Lightning Ridge, New South Wales.
There was a little baby, 4 days old. They just went to the hospital and just ripped him out of your mother's arms. That's going back in history. This is what was done with our little stolen generation children.
A fortnight ago, I received a call from community members who are in distress who said that the police and the Child Protection Agency had actually turned up at a family's house in the morning while the family was having breakfast, barged into the house, taken a 3-year-old child, put it in a car and driven it 700 kilometres away from that community. The grandmother who was in that house was wailing, chasing the car, throwing rocks at the car, and couldn't believe, saying over and over again that this is what was done to us before, when the stolen generation was at its height. This is happening again in the north of Queensland. Almost 200 babies were removed from their mothers in the hospital. Often hours after giving birth, these babies are removed by the Child Protection Services. No explanation.
The story has suddenly become very complicated. Things are not as simple as they seem. What people say and what people do are sometimes two different things. The Child Protection Agency is an official government body that is supposed to be protecting children. And in many cases it does, and the people that work for the agency do protect children against the abuses of their parents. Not all parents are nice. It's a complicated subject in itself, and one that we'll look at later on. But for now, let's just focus on the key point here, which is that sometimes people in positions of power fly what are called false flags. That's a complicated thing too. This is going to take a long time to explain, so we'll go at it slowly, piece by piece.
Iraq's declaration of December 7th, quote, did not provide any new information relevant to certain questions that have been outstanding since 1998. My second purpose today is to provide you with additional information, to share with you what the United States knows about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, as well as Iraq's involvement in terrorism, which is also the subject of Resolution 1441 and other earlier resolutions.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mr Brough and I have called this news conference to announce a number of major measures to deal with what we can only describe as a national emergency in relation to the abuse of children in Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory. But what matters more, the constitutional niceties or the care and protection of young children?
The intervention was launched on a very cynical big lie, a vicious one that smeared all Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory, because the Minister for Indigenous Affairs at the time, Mal Brough, said there were pedophile rings in all of these communities that the federal government was going to occupy. An extraordinary sweeping claim.
My second purpose today is to provide you with additional information, to share with you what the United States knows about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, as well as Iraq's involvement in terrorism, which is also the subject of Resolution 1441.
An extraordinary sweeping claim.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mr Brough and I have called this news conference to announce a number of major measures to deal with what we can only describe as a national emergency in relation to the abuse of children in Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory.
An extraordinary sweeping claim.
My second purpose today is to provide you with additional information, to share with you what the United States knows about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, as well as Iraq's involvement in terrorism, which is also the subject of Resolution 1441 and other earlier resolutions.
Laying the ground for the intervention was a lurid media campaign led by a national TV program called Lateline. Lateline claimed that Aboriginal children were the victims of sex slavery. The programme's allegations centred on the community of Mutijulu. A key witness was this man, whose identity was disguised. They called him a former youth worker.
The people who are in control are the drug dealers and the petrol warlords and the pedophiles.
There was no sex slavery, no petrol warlords, no pedophile rings. The anonymous witness was actually a senior government official who had worked in Mutijulu but never lived there. The Lateline program was exposed by investigative journalist Chris Graham, founder of the National Indigenous Times.
In 2006, Lateline began reporting that sexual abuse in Aboriginal communities was rampant and that Aboriginal men were violent and beating and abusing women and children on a scale that can't be believed. And it was that style of extraordinary sensationalist reporting that paved the way for the federal government to introduce policies that, frankly, Australians haven't seen.
I mean, the anonymous youth worker, in fact, was this government official called Gregory Andrews. And he claimed that he'd actually lived there for 7 months.
He hadn't lived there a single night. He'd never stayed overnight in Mutijulu in his life.
I've been told by a number of people of men in the region who go to other communities and get young girls and bring them back to their community and keep them there as sex slaves.
The funniest thing was seeing Greg Andrews, or seeing this man in a hat and a jumper that I knew was his hat and his jumper, and seeing him sitting there talking in this robotic voice about stuff that he'd known about this community or seemingly known about this community. And I'm sitting there watching going, is that Greg? And it was.
And who did you know Greg to be?
So Greg Andrews was my boss in the Office of Indigenous Policy Coordination. He was the Assistant Secretary, the branch manager.
So he was a senior government official?
Yes, yes.
I asked the man in the hat, Gregory Andrews, for an interview, but he declined. The Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Mal Brough, looking at the evidence, quote unquote, that the program had produced about so-called paedophile rings, said that child abuse was happening in unthinkable numbers. Extraordinary thing to say, wasn't it?
Extraordinary, particularly in the context that he knew the anonymous former youth worker on the ABC program was actually his advisor.
To me, that was indicative of a complete lack of good faith in the production of the program, and yet they just went ahead with it.
Would the minister want to say such a thing, because it's just not true? I don't understand.
The importance of the propaganda by the television programs was to create a situation in which the government could act to control those communities.
The people of Mutijulu and others complained to the ABC, and an internal inquiry of a kind was held,
yes,
and which announced that the program was exonerated. What's your view of the process that exonerated the program?
Well, I think it's farcical, really.
The Chief Justice chooses his words very carefully. He called the process that exonerated a news program from telling lies. He called it farcical. Farcical means absurd. So wrong that it's funny. But this isn't funny. It's not farcical. It's very, very serious.
The author of this report, Olga Havnen, was sacked by the Northern Territory government following its publication. The report revealed that in 1 year, the government spent almost $80 million on surveillance and removing children compared with just $500,000 on supporting these impoverished families. So $80 million a year in actually what is called child protection, but these are the people who take children away.
That's right.
Take children away on the assumption that there is child abuse across the Aboriginal community. In fact, your report shows that the Northern Territory, where the government aimed its guns and described, as the Minister did, child abuse in unthinkable numbers, is among the lowest in Australia.
That's correct. It's pretty sobering, and I think the other thing...
That's more than sobering. That's, with all respect, that's a major deception.
Mm.
No, I don't believe you.
I don't blame you if you don't believe this. It is truly unbelievable. So shocking as to be unthinkable. What possible reason could a government have for stealing Aboriginal children from their families? What possible reason could they have? Everyone acknowledges that in the past there was a eugenics movement and a desire to negate the Aboriginal race, to render them completely powerless. This was something that the Nazis did to the Jews during the Second World War. It's happened, similar things have happened in other places. It's called genocide, the deliberate, calculated extermination of a race of people. This is very hard to stomach. It's very hard to believe. But you have to look at the evidence. And there's another reason. Another reason for disenfranchising Aboriginal people in Australia. It's the same reason that wars are carried out all over the world throughout the entire history of the human species. It's about power and resources. And the purpose of power is to sequester resources. So you have them and the other guy doesn't. That's why every country has an army. Well, this raises another question, which again I'll have to put off for a later episode. The question of what exactly is a country? It's a non-trivial question. It's something that most people just take for granted. Oh, I was born in this country, therefore I belong to this country. But this country is not everybody's country. There are people living in countries who benefit from the labour of others, and there are others that toil in the fields and the factories so that the wealthy elite can make profits and enjoy luxurious lives. The whole economic system that we have is yet another story that we'll have to leave for the moment. These things are very complicated and they're all interconnected. So for the moment, let's simply return to the question of why it is believable that the West Australia government spent 16 times as much money stealing children as it did helping poor people in that part of the world. They had a very good reason for doing it, and this is it.
The Australian mining sector is enormously profitable. It makes profits of around $1 billion a week. It makes profits of just under $52 billion a year, and it's a vast amount of money. And what you basically have is large companies making massive profits from minerals that they didn't make on land that they don't own. And that's called smart economics. That's called 21st century Australian economic development.
In the 1980s, the Labor Party pledged national land rights to the Aboriginal people. They call this Australia's greatest moral cause. The mining lobby went on the attack with propaganda like this.
Through Aboriginal land claims, your right of access to up to 50% of Western Australia could be taken away. Do you think it's fair that less than 3% of our population should claim ownership of up to 50% of our land?
Full-page newspaper ads. You thought it was your home. Think again. Targeting iconic places in Australia. A beautiful picture of a beautiful place. Have you loved this? Take a good look now. Your kids mightn't get a chance to. Aboriginal people will lock it up. White people won't be able to go there. You'll need permits to go to your favourite beach. You won't be able to swim or fish at your favourite beach because the blacks will take it. It was extraordinary. It was bald, crude, and sadly, effective.
Once elected, the government of Bob Hawke gave in. Universal land rights were abandoned. In 2010, the mining industry spent $22 million on a campaign to stop a proposed tax on their super profits.
What do all those who love Western Australia say? Axe that tax.
Axe the tax. Axe the tax. And bugger off.
Please listen.
Rudd,
what should our West Australian newspaper be saying? Axe the tax. Axe the tax.
The ones that are no good to themselves and can't accept things, the half-caste, and this is where most of the trouble comes, I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breed themselves out in the future, and that would solve the problem.
All those who love Western Australia say, axe that tax.
Axe the tax. Axe the tax. And bugger off.
Please listen.
Rudd,
what should our West Australian newspaper be saying? Axe the tax. Axe the tax.
The campaign succeeded. Labor Prime Minister Julia Gillard reduced the tax to almost nothing. The revenue lost is estimated at $60 billion.
The history of colonisation and what's led up to this epidemic today is reflective of the policies of the governments, and in particular the stolen generations. Certainly incarceration and the continued incarceration of young Aboriginal men would be a key factor. And I think with a lot of young Aboriginal men, the loss of identity, culture and their heritage plays a key role in the sense of where their self-worth is diminished and their value in a society that doesn't value their culture or them as even human beings.
For a lot of our young people, they don't see any hope at the end or any light at the end of the tunnel or any hope within their future. And so for many of them, the answer is not to want to be here anymore.
White Australia doesn't have a sense of belonging to this land. It only has a sense of belonging to the establishments and its institutions and its cities it's built here. It doesn't understand this country.
No more whispering in our mind. No more whispering in our hearts. Let's rise up to break these chains. Stop these killing games.
The policy says you're a black Aboriginal Australian. You're not wanted on this earth.
Other than one of the Premier's closest friends, West Australian mining magnate Lang Hancock.
The ones that are no good to themselves and can't accept things, the half-caste, and this is where most of the trouble comes, I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breed themselves out in the future, and that would solve the problem.
Reasons. One, you're the Minister for Indigenous Health, and two, you've been the representative of some of the poorest, sickest people in Australia for 23 years. Why haven't you fixed it?
What a stupid question. What a stupid question. What a puerile question.
Right. You're being very silly, mate.
Australia is the only developed country repeatedly condemned for the abuse of its Indigenous people. Now and then Australian governments talk of reconciliation, an acceptable idea that hasn't built decent homes or got rid of blindness in children and malnutrition and Dickensian diseases. It hasn't stopped young people suiciding, and it hasn't stopped a land grab that began more than 2 centuries ago. Like apartheid South Africa, reconciliation is not possible without justice, and this will only happen when the first Australians are offered a genuine treaty that shares this rich country, its land, its resources and opportunities. The benefit then will be mutual. For until we give back their nationhood, we can never claim our own. Do you think the first Australians have a role in Australia Day? Many of them are rather offended by it.
Are they? Why?
Well, because that's the day 225 years ago that we took their country.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, we all think of them anyway, too. That's why we all celebrate.
Do you think that?
They're Aussie. We're all Australian. Are you Australian?
No.
You're not?
Irish.
How do you think the first Australians make of today? Because they haven't got a lot to celebrate, have they? The Aboriginal people.
In what way?
Well, 225 years ago, their country was taken from them.
See you later. You're full of shit, mate.
No more whispering in our minds. No more whispering in our hearts. We're gonna rise up to break these chains. Stop these killing games. So the night was blessed with evil. As the soft rain began to fall, walking through the park at midnight, coastal town on early morning. The shots ring out in the darkness, blood on the ground where he lay. Gonna rise up for you now, for the rest who have gone. But no more whispering in our minds. No more whispering in our hearts. Let's rise up to break these chains. stop these killing gangs.